Welcome, everybody. I'm going to start with the slides I usually do start with to indicate the differentiation of where we are today with where we've been as creatures some zillions of years ago. Those of you who've been on before will remember these slides. We started being hunter-gatherers several million years ago. Several 100,000 years ago, we moved into agriculture and more permanent settlement. So we got into millions to hundreds of thousands. A couple of 100 years ago, we moved into the industrial age. And a couple of decades ago, we moved into the information age. And now we're in the age of cognitive augmentation, which in the history of humanity has never happened before. We've always had tools, but they've always been passive. Way back in the hunter-gatherer stage, this stone was used to take the skins off animals that they had killed. Now we're getting to a place where generative AI is actually providing us with ideas and tools to solve problems much more effectively than we ever have as human beings. So this is a new age, the augmentation age. And we think, I think Nick and I and Neil would all agree that it's probably going to just keep going at this pace forever. This is Ray Kurzweil, and he plotted his equivalent of Moore's law, which was the price performance of computation since World War II to today. And you'll see that's 100 trillion at the top. And he expects this to continue on forever as chips get more and more populated. So, and the other thing he says, which Nick keeps informing me of, that some of these tools are improving at 100% every 3.5 months. And I say, Nick isn't an observer. He's not an academic. He's not a journalist. He's in the middle of all this stuff. And he shakes his head. Shake your head, Nick. He shakes his head. He shakes his head when he looks at the pace at which these things are improving. So for me, I think if you're in a business, it's an extinction event. It's not just an interesting bubble like the .com or an interesting aberration. This is a fundamental challenge to every single operating business in the universe. And there's only one question left to answer if you don't get started, and that's where do you want to be buried? So important stuff that you've got to take away and start moving on. And as Nick keeps pointing out, and I'll take away his lines, Canada, in terms of its productivity, is lower than Mississippi, the lowest ranked state in the United States, which is appalling. So it's really quite important that we as a nation get on this bandwagon now. Or as I say, the only thing left to do is to ask, where do you want to be buried? So there's Nick, formerly Google's chief evangelist, and he'll be with us today. It's our 6th adventure together in this podcast. And the irony of the situation is that his Wi-Fi may go out as we go through because Silicon Valley's Wi-Fi is not working too well today, right, Nick? So I'm going to take you back, give you an introduction to Neil. This is a picture taken, I think, Neil, just before you left South Africa in the year 2000. Neil and Tammy are there on the right. See that bright young guy on the right-hand side standing up? That's Neil and his wife, Tammy. And this is the rest of his family, his mom, his dad's brothers, and significant others. They made a big decision to leave South Africa and find their future somewhere else. And it ended up being in Toronto, to our wonderful blessing. So now we've got Geotab, a monumental company that just went through, and you'll see I'm wearing the badge, 4 million users. And in fact, Nick a little bit, or Neil a little bit earlier said you're at 4.3 million now. So we just went through this hurdle a few weeks ago, and now we're at 4.3 million. Geotab, that's vehicles on the road, which is quite an extraordinary record. So Neil, I'm going to throw it over to you. I'd encourage everybody to use the chat or the questions as stuff comes up as we go along. And either Nick or myself or Quinn will interrupt Neil if there's something significant that a lot of you would like to get more clarity on. So Neil Cawse, thank you for being with us. Congratulations on the achievements to date, and we look forward to hearing your story. So away. Oh, it did change you a little bit, Neil. As I So
Imagine what AI can do to your hair,
hey? That's right. Yeah. That's what happens to a programmer who scratches his head too many times. All right, Neil, over to you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks very much for having me, folks. I'm looking forward to today's conversation. I'm going to put some slides up and then, yeah, we can take this anywhere, but we've got a lot to cover today. And I will kick off and maybe just talk a little bit about who Geotab is. And I think the main purposes of that is just to kind of establish a little bit of credibility. So Geotab is a company, as David mentioned, that we really started back in 2000 when we came to Canada from South Africa. It was really to help the family get into the country. And I'll share a little bit what we are today. We're the global leader in connected transportation as recognized by ABI Research. And so what do? We help businesses make decisions. Any business that runs a fleet of vehicles, which is nearly every business, we enable them to make better decisions based on connecting their vehicles to the internet and helping them with analytics. So a little bit about who the company is. We've been around more than 23 years now. We have 2,200 employees. Our head office is here in Oakville, outside of Toronto, and we do most of the R&D work here, but we have offices in Toronto, we have offices in Waterloo, and then all over the US and Europe. So we have more than 700 partners globally, more than 50,000 customers, 4.3 million connected vehicles, and we process an awful lot of data. This is a data business, as you can well imagine. It's taking all of the insights about the data that's happening in your vehicle, creating a digital twin of your vehicle in the cloud, and then allowing customers to get inferences and understanding from that. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I just wondered how many things do you measure on a vehicle that's on the road?
Oh, it's in the order of 20 or 30 things, at a minimum, some a lot higher. And it's really, not just where the vehicle is, but the speed, the acceleration, the behavior of the vehicle. So things like the vibration coming through. It would be things like what's the engine doing? If it's an electric vehicle, it's the state of charge, how much energy is heating the cabin. It's whether your windscreen wipers are on. Just a fascinating amount of data that we process. Yeah. So to give you some insight into some of the customers that we have here, so the city of Toronto, city of Chicago, New York City. So it's take New York City, 39,000 vehicles. So every ambulance, fire truck, bus, every vehicle involved in public service, garbage disposal, street sweepers, all connected and managed with Geotab. Some very, very large fleets, some of which we can't mention, but some of the largest transportation companies in the world, big trucking companies, the US federal government. So all of the US federal government agencies, the FEMA emergency response, Coast Guard, all connected with Geotab, as well as, any company involved in food and beverage distribution, just a huge number of vehicles. The company itself, as I mentioned, does analyze data. We have had a lot of experience understanding AI. We understand the complexities of managing all that data, because you can imagine it's data overload. These poor fleet managers who are trying to run these better fleets get overloaded with data at the end of the month. And that's really where we come in to really help them make sense of it. So a little bit about the company. So it's an open platform. We believe in open standards. We believe in having a big ecosystem. You can imagine with the amount of data that we process, we're one of the largest user of cloud services, from our partner Google in the country. I think actually Shopify is number one, and we're number two. So, huge amount of rich data collection, data intelligence, and then a big focus by the company on sustainability. A big part of what we do is to actually make things more sustainable. So we help fleets migrate to using electric vehicles. We help them run their electric vehicles, and we help them understand what they can do to run a better fleet, to cut gas consumption, and to count their carbon. So that's a big part of what we do, as well as other things like safety and productivity, etc.
Yeah.
So,
I just wanted to ask before we went on to AI, the example that I remember most vividly is you working with one of the large fleet companies on batteries, where the battery transformation business was every 9 months we change all the batteries of all of our trucks because we can't afford to have them stop or not start. And then you got started on that, learned about the strengths and weaknesses of a battery through its indicators, and saved the company, I don't know, 90 to $100 million, as I recall. Is that a correct story of savings and the use of data on
yes,
fleet management?
It is close, but let me. In fact, I can even talk about it. So PepsiCo, which have around 70,000 vehicles with Geotab. I remember having a conversation with them going back. It's maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where once a year we would have this get together where we would talk about trends in the industry and what their current business problems are, and then we try and work with them to solve them. And one of them they told me was an interesting one. They said if our vehicles fail in the field, 80% of the time it's caused by the electrical system. So either the alternator failing, the starter motor failing, or the battery failing. And so, can we, from a telematics point of view, help them figure out how to solve this? And so what we did is we asked them to tell us every single time they replaced their battery. And then we gathered information about the voltage curves when you're starting your vehicle to figure out the health of the battery. And it was much harder than you expect. You know how it is. Like every day, people are talking about, oh, you just take AI and you sprinkle it on stuff and it just magically makes things better. No, certainly was a lot harder back in those days when we didn't have LLMs, although these days these LLMs are incredible. But so what we did is the guys created this model, and now they were able to figure out that they can figure out the reliability of batteries, and this is just a massive step forward because, as you said, these people are spending a huge amount of money just replacing batteries in case, so it makes improved sustainability and as well as cut costs. So that's just a great example of how AI can be applied to real world business problems and how you think about things. So yeah.
Great. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, good stuff, man. So with that, I wanted to maybe just give my reflection on AI, and I know that we've got some, Nicholas over here is a real expert, but I remember talking to the staff a little while ago when all these LLMs were coming up, like blowing our mind on all the things that they could do, and there was some very real concern expressed, where the staff said, you know, what do I need to think about here? Like, are these LLMs going to come and replace my job? And what is the future here? And I remember saying to them, I don't think that you as an employee are going to be replaced by a large language model, but I think your job is going to be replaced by people who use large language models and AI. And I think that's an important point. I think that we have to understand that these are the most incredible tools that have come across the desk in a very long time. And I think the people that embrace these tools, understand their capabilities, leverage them, and apply them are the ones that are going to be most successful. And of course, there's going to be some people that will lose their jobs in some of the areas, but I think ultimately this is just going to make us so much more efficient, and our jobs that we do are going to be better. So, we're seeing that within the company, certainly. Um, and I think that that's having quite a big impact across the board. And one of the jobs that I have to do as a CEO is keep reminding the folks, because we hear about this stuff and then we kind of become numb to it after a while. It's just how important this AI is in driving people towards it. And I remember, from a board perspective, having a board meeting recently. In fact, I'll tell you about the first board meeting that I had. And this is going back right to the beginning days of when LLMs were first launched. I remember when it kind of opened my mind as to the power of it. And LLM is, I'm sure everybody here has used ChatGPT, right? So you ask ChatGPT a question and you get an answer back. And I remember realizing to myself that the power of this thing was, I went to it and I said, I knew prompt engineering was important, but I didn't understand how important. So I said to the thing, you are an expert consultant to the CEO of the company. And in order for you to be very good at your job, you are going to need to find out a lot of information about this company, Geotab. What are the questions that you need to ask the CEO so that you can understand how the business operates, so that you can give him the best advice? And so I wrote this up and I got back 15 kind of long questions from ChatGPT, understanding the market, understanding the competitive dynamics, understanding how the company was structured, everything about the company. I remember thinking to myself, wow, I've just been given homework by a machine. And 2.5 hours later, I'm sitting there working on all the answers, pulling it from various places and filling it in. And I remember providing all the answers to ChatGPT and shocked when about 10 seconds later it came back with the answers. But nevertheless, that's the power. Came back with me and it gave me some advice. And the advice was incredible. I even went down different avenues. I looked at things like, for example, product. I said, okay, let's focus on product. Give me your best, how should we move the product direction of the company? Give me ideas on new products. And I took all this information. I went to the board meeting the next day and I presented it without telling the folks where it came from. And the folks were like blown away. All of the board members were sitting there going, that's incredible. Like, we're doing that, and we talked about that before, and we've forgotten about that, and that's a great direction to go in. And then I told them that this came from ChatGPT, and I think it dawned on everybody the importance of this. But I did, in the last board meeting, actually demo the GPT 4.0 video to the board. And before I demoed the video, I actually asked the board who had seen this video. And half the board members raised their hand and said they had seen this video on GPT-4. Now, if you haven't seen it, anybody who's on the call, I highly suggest you go and have a look at it. It shows you how you can interrupt the large language models. You can talk to them. They understand emotion. They're actually multimodal now, so you can actually draw math problems, and you can ask it to help you solve the math problems and explain to you the questions and the answers. And so it really is pretty profound. But made the point afterwards, and I said, listen, I'm not being critical here, but this is the most significant event that is going to change the way business operates more than anything else that's happened in our lifetime, including probably the internet. And us as board members, our duty is to understand the stuff and to recommend the direction. And if we are not staying up to date with where things are going, then there's a problem here. So actually, I think it's an important one that we just have to make a little bit of an effort here. Go onto Twitter, make sure that you subscribe to the right blogs, and just keep up to date with what's happening. I think one of the ways that we're trying to make sure that that we take advantage of this is to actually force it in. And it's quite interesting that this is not really, the adoption of this in our company is not really what I expected it to be. I thought that the first people that would adopt it would be the technology folks. The guys who are running software would be like, oh, this is it, and embrace it first and foremost. Actually, the number one department in the company that embraces was our legal department. And I thought they would be the most conservative. And it was just fantastic to see how they found this legal software, and they can help them rewrite their contracts and understand the corner cases in their contracts and summarize them, and really nice to see. But every single department in the company has been required to come up with a set of AI KPIs. One, it forces them to really understand what AI can and can't do, but it also makes sure that we're driving this forward, because it's easy for us just to go back to doing our day jobs and we stop thinking about the future here. But because the stuff is so profound, I think that the people who embrace it first and the people who look at it early on are going to be the best off. Now, I will say,
Neil, so it's a quick question, Neil. This is so interesting that you're a very advanced technology company, and even for your staff, you're gonna have to force this. Like, why do you think that is? And imagine if you're not a technology company, that would probably be even harder to do. So why did it have to be forced, and why did the technology staff in particular, not embrace it automatically?
You know what? It's an interesting question, and maybe it's a little bit of human psychology, because we're dealing with smart people here. But I think people we become set in our ways a little bit. When we want to go and search for something, we go to Google and we type in searches over here, and we're just accustomed to doing that. And so we programmed to act like that. And we used to doing something manually, like going to create some copyright or summarizing a document. We read the document. We don't realize that we have this tool, and we got to keep reminding ourselves that we have this powerful assistant tool sitting there that can help us. And we're not, when we're designing, coming up with new products, and we're thinking about new directions, we're not always putting this front and center. So I think it's a case of us just becoming more familiar with it, becoming more used to it, and then we start leveraging it more, and bring it into our everyday lives. And I think that was it. So we did something like, for example, we said, okay, we'll give everybody a free subscription to ChatGPT, so that they can start getting used to the ideas. And so I think that's, even with that though, when we started following up on who's using it, not using it, I was surprised how much work it is. And I think that's maybe the lesson here. It's like, we as leaders have got to sit. We know how profound this stuff is, and we just got to keep pushing it. And we're just not going to accept that until everybody is leveraging it and understands the benefits, that we got to keep moving. Now, problem with AI a little bit is it is quicksand. And so by quicksand means if you don't move, you're going to sink. And it keeps changing underneath our feet. And that's really where things become challenging, is like, we are trying to build services in our company. We're getting it to help us with support. We're getting it to help us create training videos. Working on our documentation. We're using Google Workspace to go and, summarize all our documents or find documents that we're interested in, and it's tricky. So what one of the challenges that we've had is we go and do all the work using a particular set of technology, and then 3 weeks later somebody comes out with a new open source model or Gemini 1.5 that's faster and better and slicker. Now all that effort and time could be seen to be thrown away. So our perspective is it's still worth doing because the knowledge that you build up in people's heads is very, very important. But I think the other thing is to try and think about what are the things that you can do that are going to be evergreen, that are not going to change when these models and new technologies changing around under you. And so when we think about what those are, a lot of it is, and this is maybe unique to each business, but we want to have a model that understands our business, right? Why do we want that? We want to take one of they call them foundational models, the models that are available to everybody, like Gemini and OpenAI and some Microsoft's models and Meta's models. And we want to take these models and we want to teach it about our business. We want to say, listen, here is a bunch of Q&A about what it is to be a fleet manager. How do you measure safety? What are the important KPIs? What do they care about as a fleet manager? What is vehicle maintenance? How does it work? How do you pay for vehicles? And so we build up this kind of set of information so that if the new model comes along, we can simply train the new model on this data. And this data is evergreen because as those new models come available, I can just go and retrain them and now I can get the benefit of them. And so that's one of the ideas that we've had of actually doing that is to make sure that we can be a little bit evergreen, and that's really important. So the other thing that's important is to think about how is AI going to change the world. And I remember driving a couple of times, sitting in the shower, driving home in the car, going, who are going to be the net benefactors? Now we know, I mean, you guys have seen, $3 trillion NVIDIA company, and we've seen what's happening with, Google and Microsoft and OpenAI just exploding in terms of value. Like the world recognizes very quickly that this is so profound and game changing. But who are going to be the next set of winners after them? And I think that it's any company that deals in a lot of data is going to be the next tier down. And what are those kind of companies, right? So financial institutions deal in an awful lot of data. A company like Geotab, I mentioned before that we're data overload. These poor fleet managers just get every piece of information about customer visits and vehicle behavior and driver behavior, and they can't make head or tail. And so where the AI comes in is you can have like an army of intelligence focusing on taking this data and pulling the insights out of this data. And so I really think that if your company, for those that are watching, deal in a large amount of data, you are going to be the next big winners if you can find out how to leverage AI to kind of pull these insights out for you. Now, I will say that I really believe that the tier down after that is every single company in the world is going to get huge benefits out of the AI wave. And so I don't want to mislead, but I think this is very relevant to everybody. Okay, so next area we can just kind of talk about is a little bit of the kind of 3 steps to success. Like if you are in an organization and you say, this is great, like I've played with ChatGPT myself, I've seen how this can reason with me, I see how smart it is being able to pull data and I can summarize data and all the things that it can do. But now I'm in my organization, how do I get going? And so I think the first step is to think about collecting data, right? If that data is sitting in a non-electronic form, then it is not accessible to these large language models. And so really it starts about collecting the data. And so you need to be able to, for example, plug your systems in and extract the data out of those systems. You need to be able to collect the data using IoT. If you have a fleet of vehicles, you plug a Go device in and it pulls the data out and puts it into the cloud. You have this fundamental point. If you can't manage what you don't measure, and so if you're not measuring the activity, if you're not understanding, what products are being sold, when and where, what kind of customer support calls are we having, what are my fleet doing, what are my vehicles and drivers doing, then you have a problem before you even get started. But I think that's kind of phase 1. It's like, let's collect the data, let's make sure that the data is available somewhere digitally where we can now take it to the next step. The next step is creating an environment in your company and a culture of data. Right. So what parts of that are important? I think evangelism is a part, right? So this podcast, that you have to be able to go to the people in your organization in the town halls, or you need to be able to talk to your leaders and go, this stuff is important, right? Measuring what managing what you measure, putting the data in, leveraging AI. So evangelizing the benefits, and then training. Like, how do I get started? I don't even understand data. I don't know the tools that I can use. So training, making sure that your team become a data-centric team. I think we talked about pushing the data into the data lake, and then building some data sets that your team can then pull data against. So for example, I want to know, my profit of my company. So I want a data set that's talking about, sales of individual products. I want a data set that if I'm looking at customer service about, how many customer calls are coming in. And so I build those foundational data sets. And then you need to provide the tools to your staff members so that they themselves can access the data. It doesn't help that you, as the CEO of the company, or somebody on the board, or somebody senior in the company, can access the data. It needs to be pushed right down into the organization to the bottom so that everybody has access to that data. Now, of course, there's some data in your organization, salary data and everything else, that is confidential, that you don't want to be available everywhere, but you can segment that out, and the rest of the data, as much as possible, be as open as possible, and get that data to the team. Then we get to maybe one of the interesting points, which is, many times I've heard before, people come for a tour at Geotab and we show them the big dashboards that we have, and we show them how we're using data to run a better company and how everything that we do is driven off the insights that come from data. And they say, yeah, no, we tried to talk about this at the board meeting, to say that we want to spend some money on data analytics and AI and understand this. And they asked us for the ROI. And this is one of the challenges with data. If you knew what the ROI was for, analyzing a particular piece of data, then you wouldn't need to analyze the data because you already knew the answer. And that's the hidden thing with data. It's like seeing around a corner. It's like asking somebody, well, what is around the corner? Well, if I haven't immersed myself in the data, if I'm not putting the data apart and looking at the trends and the behaviors and pulling the insights, how can you ask me to tell you what those are until I've done it? And so to me, that's one of the important points. Is like, it does take a little bit of a leap of faith. So at the highest levels of your organization, you need to be able to express that, give us a chance. Once you've collected the data, once you've provided these tools, once you've provided the data set, now people can immerse themselves in the data and they'll start looking for interesting things. It's like, why did our sales go up in Eastern Europe between this and this time? Why did customers cancel on us? Or what is all this late deliveries happening over here? All of these things will then open up insights and ways of improving your own organization. So I found that really important. The other thing that we try to do at Geotab is we create dashboards, not reports. This is a little bit of a funny one, but there's really the difference in our minds between dashboards and reports is really only that a dashboard is live. So instead of getting into the situation where we say, Joe, please go and pull me a report on A versus B, and then getting a once-off report, we say to folks, let's just take a little bit more time and create it as a dashboard so that it's evergreen, it lives forever, so that I can go back. I don't need, to ask Joe to make me another report next month. You just go back to the dashboard and I can see it next month and I can look at it this week, next week, the week after. So it's live data as opposed to reports. And so that's really something that we try to think about, when we think about AI. Yeah.
And
So,
that,
I mean, maybe that helps.
that, Neil, as I recall, is available within your company to every employee to get them all immersed totally in what are the profit dynamics of Geotab and the customer relationships. And it's all visual in your office too, as I recall.
Correct. So, I mean, we have, hundreds, maybe even thousands of these dashboards. But what we've done is we've said, let's take the most important measures of the company performance and let's put them up in a very big dashboard in our offices that everybody can see. And I do think that it helps people. You know how it is. Like, we get lost in the weeds a little bit. If I'm a customer support person, I might be dealing with a particular customer problem and I'm involved in solving that customer's problem. But if I look up at the dashboard and I look at the numbers, what is the trend? Is it going up or down? Am I getting like a crisis happening because there's like a whole flood of calls coming in because something's gone seriously wrong? It just does help. Like if I'm in finance, I have a dashboard about my cash flow. I have a dashboard of my inventory level. And so it does help frame, what am I here for? As an employee of the company, what is the bigger picture? And so I think that's really, really powerful. And, making it available to everybody is, as we said, just kind of, so, the kind of that open approach to sharing information, transparency really does help. Okay. So, maybe I wanted to give you a couple of little examples of how we talk about AI. So we don't need to get into too much technical detail here. But one of the things that we're working on at the moment, and just to show you kind of how I believe how profound this stuff is we're looking at improving safety. And so what we did is we said, we want to create some models on figuring out exactly how we can make our drivers on the road safer. We want to take in a whole bunch of measures about the behavior of the vehicle on the road. How many harsh braking events are happening? How fast is Neil driving? What time of the day is it? And combining all this information in a model that can then turn around and tell me what is the likelihood of Neil having an accident in the next 1,000,000 miles. And this is really, really profound, because if we can do that and we can do that well, then what we can do is we can look at the factors that make Neil a good driver, a bad driver. How much does speed impact Neil's safety? Following distance, how important is that? How much impact does time of day have? Even context matters. If I'm going onto the on-ramp on a highway and the sun's bright and blaring in my eyes, I may not have great visibility. How much does the weather impact, the driving? So I know that it's pouring with rain or there's ice on the ground. And so, this is an example of really how we're using the AI and the AI models and how we think about, how we can improve things. So, a little bit about, the context here. So, we know, for example, that weather has a huge impact on the performance and safety of driving. But these prediction models, we understand how it works for weather, right? So you go in and you say, I know whether it's raining now, I know what the wind is now, I know what it was an hour ago, an hour before that, and I run a prediction model and I can come up with a 7-day forecast. There's no reason in the world why we can't do the same thing the way that we drive. And so, I think that that's how we think about things. Now, we have just done a bunch of other really interesting ones as well. We use it for the electrical health, we use it for preventative maintenance, we use it for fuel. But one of the ones that I'm most excited about is this new project that we have called ACE. And so this is taking this whole large language model and applying it to your data. And this to me is really interesting. So I can
Neil,
now start talking to my data.
Neil, if you don't mind, just some contextual information for the audience. If you could explain Geotab as essentially an elevator pitch. When we talked about it last, it was Salesforce for geodata.
Yes, so sure. Basically, let me give you a couple of ideas of how customers would leverage Geotab. So if you're running a fleet of vehicles, you want to improve your safety, you want to make your vehicles more sustainable, you want to run a more efficient fleet. And so it's a set of tools that allow you to analyze those behaviors. How much time am I spending at customers? How do I route my vehicles more efficiently to get from A to B? How can I, look at my dangerous drivers and help them be safer? How do I maintain my vehicles better? So that's really what we do, provide a set of tuning around that. Now, in the past, if the CEO of the company came to you and asked you a bunch of questions and said, which are my least safe vehicles? Which are my vehicles that I can change to electric vehicles, and which ones shouldn't I change yet? What is the amount of fuel that I used last week? You could be an expert in the product, and you could go and you would take an hour or whatever, pull the data, run some reports, run a spreadsheet, and pull all the data. Now, what we're finding is with LLMs and AI, we're creating this project called Project ACE, where you can essentially have a conversation with your data. Now, There's some interesting challenges around this because we have some pretty significant customers, and we cannot afford their data to be going to OpenAI or anybody for that matter. So we have to keep their data secure and safe. But at the same time, we want to be able to leverage the power of these models so that people can ask questions of their data. So we came up with this approach, which is quite interesting, where essentially we train the LLM to understand fleet management. So what is safety? How does safety work? And then we want the LLM, we're not going to give the LLM the raw data. We want the LLM to tell us, how do we query the data? Not going to query it for us, but it's going to tell us how to query the data. And the LLM will come back and say, if you want to answer that question, this is what you need to do. This is the recipe. And then Geotab will take the recipe. We'll run the recipe against that customer's data. So we'll keep it secure, pass the data back to that customer without taking all that data and sharing it with the LLM. And so what we find is an amazing insight that customers get. We're running in beta at the moment on this product. And for the first time, it's now you've dropped things that used to take hours down to minutes. And you can now, as I said, have a conversation with your data, and you can pull those insights out so quickly that this is game changing. And so this is we call Project ACE, but this is one example of how you think outside the box about how you solve the problem, right? It's like every one of us can think about our products in our own environments and how LLMs can apply to it. And this is how Geotab chose to apply it.
So Neil, if you're just make sure I understand, so the LLM is actually writing SQL queries to query the databases.
100%.
So basically, if you're a business analyst or a BI expert, you've just seen the computer just do your job for you, and that's pretty extraordinary. So it's like very complicated joining of very complex databases. And what's the accuracy rate of the LLM doing this approximately? Is it really good?
It's very, very good. And what we use multi-shot. So what happens is sometimes we'll run the query and the query will have an error in it, but it's okay. Because what we do is we take the error back. We go back to the LLM and we say, we ran this query on your behalf and this field is wrong, or this didn't work properly. And the LLM goes, oh, silly me, corrects its mistake. And that's called multi-shot. And so we get it to improve its accuracy. And then we keep lots of really good data on how that's performing over time. And we keep a whole bunch of checks and balances in. And actually, what we're doing as well is we're running a second LLM. It's keeping its eye on the first LLM. So we're allowing the one LLM to check the other LLM. It's like a human checking another person's work. And so that we can make sure that they're not crazy things happening. So we, for example, make sure that people are asking questions relevant to fleet management. We don't want them to be asking questions about something that's completely unrelated to fleet management. And so it's just an interesting world of like using these building blocks and kind of chaining them all together and making them work well.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that's really what I wanted to cover in terms of the presentation. That's really the important bits, just to show you, give you a bit of a sense of how we think about AI as being profound in our own business, how we've taken AI to the next level with something like Project ACE, and how we think about AI and other forms of AI, which is not LLMs, but other types of AI. And really how we're using data and AI in our own organization, and how we've empowered our own organization to use AI. Now, there are a bunch of concerns with AI. There's, we've got the existential risks that we're talking about. We've got data security that we're talking about. We've got the quicksand issues that we're talking about. We've got people issues. How do we deal with, what's going to happen with people's jobs and stuff? But there's lots of, we don't know all the answer to these questions yet, but I think these are the issues that we're grappling with, and these are the issues of our time, really.
Yeah, Neil, that was the first question from Susan in the chat. If you can go deeper on some of these concerns, actually, from the most local ones, right, at a company level, data security and breaches, cybersecurity, all the way up to the more kind of high level societal issues. Like, I would just love to get your perspective on all of these kind of concerns and negative things that could happen going forward.
For sure. I mean, I think it's one of these things where, us as people who run our company, if we don't embrace this now, we're going to be left behind. So we know we have no choice but to move ahead very quickly, understanding AI and leveraging AI. But it comes with a bunch of concerns, right? So, I mean, many of them we know, but it's worth just framing them for the moment. The first one is when we're having these conversations with the AI. I mean, even me putting the details of my company into ChatGPT, those 15 questions that ChatGPT asked me, I have to sit there and, I tried to not put any of the sensitive details in, but we know how security on the internet works, right? It's just a matter of time before one company or another company has some level of exploitation, right? If you go into, there's a website called Have I Been Pawned, which is actually run by a tech luminary, and I would recommend that everybody look at it, where you can actually go on, and what this guy does, I think it's Troy, he goes through the dark web and he finds all the places where people have done these dumps of exploits, where they've got databases of usernames and passwords and dates of birth and everything else. And you can go on there and you can put your email address in, and you can see what exploits are on the dark web related to your email address and your password. And it's actually frightening. I mean, I think my own, Geotab email address and, even my Gmail address, like you look at the number of times I've had exploits, I think it's like 13 exploits on my Gmail account and, 7 or something on my Gmail account. And so this is pretty scary. So it's a matter of time before the conversations that I'm having with these LLMs with one of the companies probably ends up somewhere on the internet. And that's frightening. I mean, these things, are used by us to ask them very personal questions. They use, business related. And so I think we need to be careful. So that's maybe the first thing that we need to be aware of. The other one is, hallucinations. And I think we know, I mean, it's not to say that people don't lie, but these models are really tuned to make their answers believable. And sometimes a believable answer is a correct answer, but sometimes a believable answer is what they call an hallucination, right? And so we've got to be very, very careful to double check important things. If we're asking for medical advice, we need to just find another source. And I know this is a big technical problem that the Googles and the OpenAIs and Microsofts and everybody in the world are working to solve, making sure we reduce the amount of hallucination, that we have references, that you can see where I got the information from. So I think that's kind of important. I do worry a little bit, to be frank, about the concentration of power when it comes to AI. This is something that concerns me. And we partner with all these large companies, Amazon and Google and Microsoft. But I'll tell you, there's an immense amount of power being concentrated in these large tech monopolies, and the power is only going to be increasing. But the amount of money taken to build a large language model now is now going from, it used to be tens of millions of dollars to hundreds of millions, and it's going to multiple hundreds of millions of dollars to build a foundational model. And there's only very few companies in the world that can afford to do this. And because of the profound nature and the impact it's going to have on society, these folks have that power. And so, at least we have some kind of counterbalance in some of the open work being done by NVIDIA and by Meta. But I think we're, as a company, going to keep an eye on these open approaches as well, because I think we've got to make sure that, that there is a bit of a balance of power there. Then, finally, I do worry longer term about the existential risks. And there's been a lot of talk about this. And I know Jeffrey Hinton, who's kind of the father of AI, some really, he's a very, very smart man who really, his teams, the people that he taught, are the people that invented transformers and these LLMs. And these are the people that, Ilya and, all these guys are the ones that are running these companies today and created this technology. And he is very worried about the existential threat, where, we're believing that these things are just a statistical model and, they're not really reasoning and understanding. And no, that's absolutely not true. And so, he worries that how do you control something that is smarter than you? How is it even possible? Like, is there any example in that we know in society where something, less smart can control something more smart? And it's saying, while we are smarter than the model, with a little bit of time we got left, let's spend some money and some time and effort on figuring out what are the guardrails that we can put in place before it's too late. And I do think that it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but I promise you, it's not. It's something that we need to take a little bit more seriously. Now, we can't ignore the benefits that this is going to bring to society. If you can start, inventing new materials, if you can start inventing new drugs by combining, understanding how proteins fold, if you can, sift through the vast amounts of health data to understand trends, to know, what are the things that lead to disease and what don't. We can't afford a society not to embrace that, not to take that on. So we have to really think about that. But at the same time, we need to just be very aware of the safety of these models and understand the impact.
Yeah, Neil, that was super helpful. There's a question in the chat about Geotab. You mentioned a few of the use cases, but can you, I think you've got some potential clients on the call. Could you explain, if I have a large fleet, what are the kind of 5 best ways for me to be more green, save money, help the safety of my drivers? What are the big use cases? I know there's many, but what are the ones that are the most important?
Yes, I mean, some interesting things that we see with any companies running fleets, which just really amazes me. We have our partners are some of the best companies, are some of the best fleets in the world, and their fleets, in the best case, are only around 85% utilized. So if you think about how much you pay for a vehicle, you think about how much a vehicle costs you, the lifetime cost of a vehicle. If you're only, in the best possible case, using it 85% of the time, imagine how much money you can save by raising that 85 to 90 or that 90 to 95. And so there's an enormous cost benefit that comes from being able to optimize your fleet better, making sure you have the right vehicles that are doing the right job and they're in the right place at the right time. So that's one example. Another one is, we all, want to be more sustainable. We have sustainability programs, but there's nothing worse than, okay, I'm just going to select these vehicles and I'm going to replace them with electric vehicles. And then I find it's a disaster because they don't have the range, that they don't end up being used because I don't know how to charge them. They're not sitting in the location long enough. So being able to understand the behavior of your fleet, to be able to select the 10% of your fleet that are perfect to switch to EVs and leave the other 90% for now, I think makes a world of difference as well. The other thing is, like, what was interesting to me is if you think about how a fleet routes. So if I've got a job to do, maybe I'm an air conditioning company, right? And I've got to go and service air conditioners at customers. What we did is we took a study across a broad range of fleets. We said, let's look at how you are going from customer to customer and how many kilometers you travel, how much time you spend in traffic, and how much time you spend doing work versus traveling. And then we said, if we optimize that, if we put that into a machine that said, listen, I'm not going to go from one side of Toronto back to the other side, back to the first side. I'm going to find the optimal way to go from customer A to B to C to D to E. And now how much distance would I travel and how much time would I spend traveling? And what we were able to find was that we could cut the amount of time that a driver spent traveling by 30%. Not only saving gas, 30% of the gas, but 30% more time for that driver to be out making money for you, right? Servicing a fleet or doing something else. So again, it goes back to this: you can't manage what you don't measure. And when you start understanding how your fleet is operating, what it's being used for, what it's doing, you start unlocking these ideas about, I didn't even know that I could increase the utilization by another 10%. Safety is another one that continues to be amazing. It's one of the key use cases where we don't realize the cost of safety. Like, obviously human lives are the most important thing, but if you actually look at just, any kind of accident, the cost to the company is enormous. That you've got to have backup vehicles. The person's out for at least a day. You've got to have, you got to get those vehicles repaired. The cost of insurance, and so all of that actually weighs in too. So very many use cases, and I think, while we're talking specifically here about the fleet management industry, I think a lot of these lessons around understanding data can be applied to many, many different industries, even outside fleet management.
That's a good point, Neil. One more question for me, and I think this maybe for me is the most important. I mean, you've built a world-class AI company in Canada, and it's, I think, served you really well. Canada's a great place to build, an AI company. Yet Now, Canada's significantly behind in AI adoption compared to the US and the UK. What are you doing differently to be so kind of forward on AI, and why do you think Canada's so far behind compared to, I mean, all the extraordinary work that you've done, and what can Canada do to right the ship here in terms of, you know, being on par with the US in terms of AI adoption?
You know, this is a little bit of a personal opinion, but I'll certainly give it to you. I think a little bit of it hinges around risk. We're a little bit risk averse in Canada, and we need to take a little bit more risks investing in something that we think is going to work. We're not 100% sure, but we've got to go big, and we've got to invest in technology. We've got to invest in building. We've got to focus on the right industries here too. I know that Canada largely is a resource economy, but you know, we need more tech jobs. We have a wonderful, you know what? I think Canada for us has been one of the best decisions that we ever made. So I came over in 2000, not understanding anything, right? Why did we choose Canada? And I'll give you the honest truth. The honest truth is, like, we looked at all the countries in the world and we said, what is a country that we can go to where our family can get in, that speaks English, and that is going to offer a fantastic future for our kids? And Canada came up as number one, right? So I mean, it's a great place to come. And so I came here, you know, always thinking that, okay, so we've got a big brother on our doorstep, and you know, Canada for South Africa, and the weather was a little tricky. Came to Canada thinking that one day we're going to move to the States. We're super happy in Canada. We're not moving to the States. This is the best place ever. And the reason why us as a company have done so well is Canada has a very open immigration policy to select the best and brightest people on a point system. And the GTA is really where these people come to. And in a sense, this has all changed a little bit with COVID, but Geotab was able to employ people here in Canada, you know, at 40 to 50% cheaper than we would ever be able to get them in any of the markets in the US. And yet we had the US on our doorstep, one of the most, you know, the largest markets in the world, where they invest so much in IT and technology, and it's so open to Canada that we were able to take advantage of that. And so I think more companies should realize that this is a fantastic place to do AI, to do you know, IT and resourcing and stuff, and build up your base here in Canada. And many of the US companies are figuring that out. Like with COVID and remote working, you know, they're starting to employ our folks, you know, in the GTA, leaving them staying in the GTA, working for many of the American companies. But we as Canadian companies, we can do the same thing, and we should. And I think we need to grow there.
Yeah, the other thing I think that comes to mind, Neil, when we ask you, how did this happen that Geotab became a world leader? And Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z, they asked Mark Andreessen, what would you do to get any publicly traded company much more involved in this digital tsunami? And his answer was as easy. Appoint the chief technology officer, CEO. And you've already said you drive this stuff, and that's what do you love to do on Sunday afternoons, Neil? You love to program. So we have, in effect here, Nick, I think the model company run by somebody who really understands, believes this, and pushes it relentlessly, sort of as an adjunct to proving Mark Andreessen's policy suggestion. Put the CTO in immediately as CEO.
That's an interesting perspective. But I think that for everybody, though, you know, this AI stuff, you don't need to be a technical person. I mean, I am, but I don't think you need to be a technical person to see the opportunity and understand the benefits. And I mean, I think, you know, all of us on this call here today, you know, can lead the charge in our companies to push this forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Neil. Gwen?
So Nicholas had to leave a little bit earlier. He wanted me to hop on. One thing that I thought was really tremendous, because we've done this for 6 months now. And what I think is fascinating is that your business is not just at the center. You are a technical leader that is building a model, quote unquote. But over the last 20 years, you've built this business and it's been data driven. So looking at all of the technology waves, mobile, cloud, SaaS, and working in a industry, which is around logistics and transportation, which doesn't necessarily come top of mind when it comes to being early adopters when it comes to technology. You have a lot of experience by the fact that you have 4 million members that David's listed here, selling and pitching and leading through prototypes. And a lot of these folks who are in director positions are understanding this opportunity, but don't have that hands-on direct experience. So what can you say from the last 20 years about how this is different, how those conversations need to be had to actually make meaningful progress?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, there's so many of our smartest people in the world working on technical solutions, like the folks that work at Google and Microsoft. And I think many of the industries that we're in could get so much benefit out of bringing technology to those industries. And we've kind of neglected that a little bit. And so you look at the transportation industry, and it's like big trucks and pieces of paper, and that's, really what it's about. It's about transforming these industries and unlocking what these industries can be if everything is moved digitally. And I think that's to me is an exciting piece. Like, all of these traditional industries are ripe for transformation, and making these industries, completely different is where a company can be very, very successful. And so I think that's, that's kind of the lesson.
What about the conversations for directors in the room about getting started, like that specific getting into the wave? And this will be our final question here.
So it's you saying in these traditional industries, if a director wants to go, how do I embrace and get involved in this wave of AI and technology? Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really making sure that you bring somebody technical on under your wing who you can leverage and rely on to help you on the technology side, because the technology side becomes complicated. There's so many different technologies. There's so many different ways of doing things. You need to say, listen, I'm the business guy. I understand that this can be transformational. Let me bring in my expert on the side and go, how would you do something? How can I leverage it? What can I do? I mean, I still go back to those 3 lessons that I had in the beginning. It's like, start with very simple points. Collect all the information, create an environment where your team can access that information really easily, right? The tools, the training, the building blocks, and then the rest will fix itself, because they will start playing with the data. They'll see the insights. And when they see those insights, that's when your business starts to change. And that's really the recommendation that I would have on how to get that going.
Excellent. Thank you very much for being here today. On behalf of David, on behalf of Nicholas, take this opportunity to point the audience to anything that you have going on, or where to find more information around about you.
That's perfect. I'll put the Geotab websites in there, and anybody who does want to get some more information or need some help, just you can ping me on email. I'll put my email address in there. But hopefully this was helpful to folks, and I'm really happy to help anybody else who wants some pointers on anything. But this has been a great conversation. We appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Neil. Yes, on behalf of David, on anything you want to add there, David?
No, I'm just thrilled that you took the time, Neil. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Very, very grateful. This is number 7 on our list, and we're going for the rest of the year. Our next one is going to be about measuring AI guardrails. It's with an expert based out of Ottawa, Niraj Bhargavi from newenergy.ai. For anyone who is concerned or leads massive organizations around data security breaches, they've built a system that's patented around creating trust. So understanding all of the potential vectors with security and artificial intelligence. So that's coming in July. We'll be sending a recording, and we're grateful for everyone participating. Have a great summer.
Thanks, Gwen. Thank you. Thanks again, Neil.
Thanks, folks.